If you feel like you have to convince people, over-explain, or justify yourself to be understood, this episode unpacks the trauma root of over-explaining, especially after gaslighting, false accusations, and chronic misunderstandings. Over-explaining isn't actually a conscious communication strategy. It's more about trying to feel safe. And we might think that we're trying to communicate more clearly in order to be understood, but what's often happening under the surface is that we're trying to protect ourselves from rejection. So over-explaining is a coping mechanism, yet over-explaining and oversharing rarely bring greater clarity. Some of us grew up in an environment where we were often in trouble, but we didn't do anything wrong. Or maybe we did do something wrong, but the accusation was inflated and shame-based instead of simply addressing what we did and offering contained guidance. That kind of early life conditioning means you're not just used to having to make a case for your innocence, you're also trying to prove your character. Yet maybe everything that you said was twisted and used against you. Maybe no one believed you. Maybe they patronized you, or maybe they didn't even hear you because they had already decided who you are and what you did. If you relate to that kind of childhood experience, you'll probably also notice the weariness of always feeling like you have to contextualize, negotiate, or justify your existence. So you over-explain to prove yourself, to defend your truth, to be understood, to vindicate yourself, to feel safe, to fix something out there that feels broken and seems like it could just clear up with more communication until one day you're so drained and frustrated that you have no more energy left to keep defending yourself. Several years ago, I had a client who told me that she became a litigation attorney because of exactly these kinds of childhood experiences. And she was really good at her job. But what she realized was that becoming a powerful litigator actually didn't heal the past, which was still echoing in her relationships, her inner dialogue, her health. Over-explaining is often thought of in the context of an external conversation, and those are draining. But the most exhausting form of over-explaining happens internally, in the self-talk, when you doubt and second guess yourself, and you feel that endless need to try to resolve and prove your worthiness or your existence. But no matter how much you try to explain in order to feel safe, it never really leads to real safety. Because the safety you're looking for won't come from saying more to others or ruminating about it longer in your own mind. Sometimes people just see reality so differently that it's impossible to arrive at a shared perspective of what's real. And we can see this reaching epitome on the collective level too. People are living in vastly different realities. The noise is getting louder as people are trying to convince each other that their view of reality is the truth. But this goes much deeper than the surface arguments. When we have a trauma reflex rooted in the emotional residue of rejection and accusation, we might unknowingly use language as a shield to avoid the pain of those experiences. Over-explaining is a trauma echo, and it's often based on the fear of creating a misunderstanding or being misunderstood, which lead to that sense of shame and rejection because of what it felt like in childhood. Maybe you felt misunderstood, unseen, or unaccepted all your life. Maybe you are carrying the grief of not being believed. And maybe you don't even realize how these painful experiences can cause an addiction to narrative control in order to feel safe. Many of us had ancestors who, for one reason or another, were rejected, shunned, isolated, outcasted, imprisoned, tortured, even killed for speaking the truth, or being persecuted for being trouble to the status quo. That leads to unresolved generational patterns of having to prove your existence, having to convince other people, having to explain, having to defend your truth or even your right to exist. In this episode, we're going to be untangling the deeper roots of over-explaining. We're going to explore how early life rejection can condition us to erase ourselves while trying to assert our existence. In this eighth portal of our nine-part mini-series on the emotional and behavioral anchors that weigh us down in life and relationships, we'll explore that question: what am I trying to avoid by explaining it away? This is the work of reclaiming your voice, your existence, free from having to convince anyone. Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is why you feel the need to convince people, the hidden trauma behind over-explaining. And let's face it, sometimes we just don't have the energy to do the inner work, or we don't know what to do about it. That's why I want to tell you about a little device that you can use to self-regulate your nervous system with the click of a few buttons during intense moments when you just need relief so you can function or sleep. It's called the Vibe. I've been using much more complicated and costly frequency devices for almost 20 years. I was blown away when I saw how affordable this device is and how easy it is to use because it puts sovereign wellness back in the hands of the people. This little pocket device uses frequencies to relieve symptoms like anxiety, inflammation, neck pain, back pain, fibromyalgia, headaches, irritability, depression, brain fog, insomnia, heart issues, and more. You can use it on your dogs, cats, and horses too. I've even used it on my dog when she had some digestive inflammation. For me personally, I found that the general inflammation setting is one of the most important protocols to use. So the Vibe is based on technology with a 98% success rate in alleviating the symptoms of post-trauma. Your search for PEMF on PubMed will yield hundreds, if not more, scientific studies revealing its potential benefits. If you want to get your Vibe, you'll find the link to this affordable device in the show notes. That's where you can listen to the interview I did with the rocket scientist who developed it. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. Information provided is for educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as medical advice for preventing, diagnosing, curing, or treating any disease. Obviously, consult a qualified professional for any questions specific to your health and well-being. The dynamic of over-explaining and convincing. Over-explaining is a bid for safety and belonging. The shift that we're going to explore here isn't just stop explaining. It's about learning to trust that your truth can stand without scaffolding. Because over-explaining builds scaffolding around the vulnerability, because at some point the truth didn't feel safe. Your nervous system learned, if I add context, if I soften it or justify it, maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I'll finally be accepted, loved, or connected. So the invitation here isn't just to strip the scaffolding away abruptly. It's to first notice what you believe will happen if you don't convince others. Over-explaining is often an attempt to regulate the listener's reaction. And reaction control is rarely possible anyways because other people are just going to hear what they want to hear. They're going to believe what they want to believe. There was a false sense of safety in convincing others to see reality as you do. When we try to manage other people's perception, we try to manage their reaction. So over-explaining is a form of control to avoid feeling unsafe. But safety via control isn't true safety. When you've had a lot of relational trauma, you've surely felt misunderstood, unseen, falsely blamed. You might notice that you developed a habit of wanting to convince people. And you might also notice that that drains a lot of energy and leads to exhaustion. And maybe what you don't realize is that in the background, you're thinking, if I can just explain it well enough, maybe I won't be blamed. Maybe I won't be rejected. Maybe I'll finally be seen accurately. So it's natural that convincing becomes a form of survival. But it also leads to frustration and more relational conflict because when we try to convince people, they usually don't understand more or better. They just feel the resistance, they feel pressure, even if subtly. So they might shut down or become defensive in return, and then the argument escalates. Then maybe that triggers a sense of urgency for you, which makes you feel even more unsafe. So you explain more to try to convince more, and it's an endless frustration, exhaustion loop. The relational issue here isn't just about rejection, it's about alignment and something deeper happening underneath the surface. Alignment doesn't require persuasion. If someone is available for your truth, they can meet you without being forced to. And if they aren't available for your truth, no amount of convincing is going to create understanding. It's only going to lead to more conflict. Yet the fear of external rejection is actually pointing to something internal too. Rejection doesn't register as a simple preference mismatch or a misalignment of values and reality. When that has early roots, it can register as I don't get to exist as I am. Boom. That's the heavier weight. It's not a small fear, it's existential. And that's where the deeper pain is. So, of course, we want to avoid feeling that. And from that lens, over explaining and convincing isn't about just avoiding invalidation and rejection, it's about securing your reality and existence. If you grew up in a highly dysfunctional environment, as many of you probably have, you probably experienced a lot of gaslighting, whether that was intentional or not. So you may be used to having to defend your reality because you're used to having your reality erased, distorted, or denied. That's why misunderstanding feels like annihilation. And this is why convincing and over explaining is a way of fighting for existence. Yet, in the process of trying to affirm your existence, you might unknowingly be abandoning and erasing yourself. So, what is this compulsion to convince and over explain? Well, for someone who's been gaslit since childhood, disagreement doesn't just feel like difference, it feels like a distortion of reality. And that distortion feels like erasure. So over explaining becomes a way to anchor reality. It's like, if I can make you see it the way I do, then I'm not crazy. I'm not invisible. I exist. That's why the impulse carries urgency. It's existential. Here, we're touching the root. So the shift is moving from trying to secure reality externally to holding reality internally. From believe me so I can exist to I exist whether or not you believe me. That's not defiance, it's reclamation. It's the shift of moving from the coping mechanism, which is trying to secure reality externally, to remembrance, which is standing in reality internally. And if you've never known how to stand in your reality, you might notice how there's a compulsion for litigating and negotiating your existence when something feels threatening. That compulsion to convince someone or to clear up a misunderstanding is often an attempt to make your inner world undeniable. The adult trying to manage the unintegrated inner child thinks, if I can articulate this clearly enough, thoroughly enough, you'll have to see me. And if you see me, I exist. So over explaining tries to ensure three things: that I'm real, that I'm worthy, that I'm safe. So it's not only about preventing rejection, it's about trying to prevent erasure. Yet when we over-explain to secure our existence, we subtly erase ourselves in the process. We shift from standing in our reality to litigating it. And when we litigate our existence, we step out of it. We start arguing instead of inhabiting. So the deeper shift isn't just stop explaining. Here's something you can try on. See how it feels. My existence doesn't require your agreement. And when you say it, notice that there's spine in it. It's not defiance, it's not withdrawal, it's just steadiness. What does it feel like to let that land? And right now, maybe that hasn't fully landed yet. This might be a very new concept for you, and that's okay. But from whatever space you're in right now, notice what you believe will happen if you don't explain more or convince the other person that you're right. Here's something else you can try on. I don't need to convince you in order to stand in what's true for me. Feel it in your body. If you let this new possibility permeate your being, that misunderstanding is not annihilation. What changes in how you relate to the compulsion to convince others? Does it feel like truth, knowing, signal is landing, or is there still a resistance? Notice what the resistance is telling you. You probably have some resistance surfacing right now, and that's okay. We're going to unpack this layer by layer. If that's starting to land for you, notice what feels different in your body compared to when you started listening to this episode. Coherence happens when your nervous system isn't trying to manage the reaction of other people. It simply transmits the inner alignment and clarity of knowing without anyone else needing to co-sign on your worthiness to exist or your perspective of reality. That kind of signal doesn't feel straining or tense. It doesn't chase anything. It doesn't add pressure. It just is. Now let's go another layer deeper. When disagreement feels like annihilation, when you try to convince someone, you're usually avoiding the raw exposure of the deeper pain in the moment. And that pain might sound like, you don't agree with me. You don't see me. I can't control that. And if you don't accept my reality, I don't exist. That feels threatening to a nervous system conditioned that way. So protective intelligence kicks in to make you feel safer. But what you're avoiding isn't the disagreement itself, because a disagreement is just information. The root is in the helplessness that can surface underneath the conflict. So here's a quick check-in. Answer yes or no to these questions without overthinking it. Number one, when someone disagrees with you, do you feel that immediate body surge? That could be heat, your heartbeat pulsing in your whole body. It could be nausea. It could be a tight throat. It could be tunnel vision. Does something like that happen? Number two, in that moment, do you feel a flash of something like, something's wrong with me? I'm bad. I'm unsafe. Number three, do you feel compelled to prove your reality, to explain more, to gather evidence to litigate your case? Number four, afterward, do you replay it like it's life and death, like your nervous system is trying to win your existence back? If you got two or more yeses, your system is still probably interpreting disagreement as a relational and existential danger rather than a perspective difference. Trauma distorts, I see it differently, into you don't exist. Integration restores the distinction. The old imprint says, if you don't validate my reality, I lose safety, I lose belonging, I might lose you, and I might lose myself. So convincing people creates an illusion of agency in that destabilizing space. But what's actually happening in the moment is that the disagreement triggers three layers of experience. The first one is the reality threat. My perception is being challenged. The second is the attachment threat. If I'm wrong or I did something wrong, I might lose connection. And the third one is the identity threat. If my reality doesn't count, I don't count. Then the nervous system triggers the compulsion to fix it, to secure the connection, to affirm your existence. And that soothes the fear of helplessness in the moment, but it keeps you in the trauma loop. So the deeper work here is initially tolerating that feeling of helplessness without collapsing and recognizing it's the inner child feeling triggered, not the adult. Because adults aren't helpless, children are. So, can you pause and breathe to interrupt the pattern of giving the child the steering wheel? Can your inner adult have compassion for your inner child? And that may bring up early life experiences of rejection, those times when you were so little that you felt helpless to do anything about it, and it felt like an existential threat because it was. For a child, rejection isn't philosophical, it's existential. There's no escape, there's no autonomy, there's no internal anchor in the identity yet. So the system adapts by trying to control the situation in order to feel safe. And that illusion of agency was protective. It made the feeling of helplessness survivable, so it didn't feel like such a threat to your existence. But as adults, when that same reflex activates, we're no longer helpless children. Yet the subconscious and the body can't tell the difference when we get triggered by unresolved trauma. So we try to fix it externally, and in doing so, we subtly abandon ourselves, negotiating our truth in existence instead of inhabiting it. Gaslighting trains the nervous system to equate disagreement with non-existence. Healing restores the truth that differing views don't delete you. Disagreements don't erase you. Before integration, being contradicted feels like a survival threat. But after integration, it's just an informational exchange. You can misunderstand me and I'll stay with myself. That's the piece that wasn't available in childhood. So notice that this shift isn't cold detachment. It's also not shutting down, it's integration. As children, we didn't have the words to explain. We didn't have the leverage of language to convince other people. So the system did what it could to survive. It shut down, or it left the body by dissociating, or we fawned to shape shift in order to preserve the connection or to be accepted. And both of those, all of those were forms of self-abandonment, but they were intelligent at the time. They preserved attachment and a sense of safety when autonomy and leaving weren't possible. And then adulthood arrives. Now we have words, we have logic, intellect, rationale. So the survival mechanism becomes more sophisticated. We argue for our existence. We believe that the intellect can solve what once felt unsolvable. We think if I can articulate it perfectly, I can finally prevent the annihilation. And that can feel empowering, but it's still the same survival threat, just more sophisticated. So we continually run into the same pain at the root of it all. Yet as adults, we have many more possibilities. That means existence is no longer up for debate. Over-explaining once made perfect sense. It was a brilliant survival mechanism. But now we can choose something new. So how does this show up in the collective pulse? We can see the same existential threat in the collective, especially online in our social media culture now. People are screaming at one another in the comments. I don't really see that on my channel, and maybe that's just because there isn't much activity in general here now, but I see it all over the internet. What's really happening is that people want to know they exist, and they feel their existence is threatened by the intensifying chaos in our world and the lack of reality coherence from person to person. Maybe in the past there was more of a collective consensus of reality. Not that we all ever saw everything exactly the same, but there was more of that consensus, which felt like safety. Whereas nowadays, it's like split timelines. Two people can experience the same thing and have drastically different opinions of what happened. You can put on two different news channels talking about the same exact event, and you can hear two totally different narratives. We're all feeling this instability in relationships, at the family dinner table, in social gatherings, and certainly online. It's normal that people feel helpless to do anything about that. Hence, there's also a lot of trying to convince or force other people to see reality in the same way. So this isn't just a personal pattern, it's in the collective nervous system. It is the cultural pulse in the field. And there's grief in that because beneath the arguing, the convincing, the annoying, unhinged reactions, there's a profound sadness. People feel destabilized, helpless. There's mourning there. And when reality feels fractured, the nervous system can panic because if there's no shared solid ground, where do we stand? So convincing becomes the existential anchoring. If you don't agree with my version of reality, I disappear. So I have to make you agree. In a world of algorithmic amplification, that fear gets multiplied and rewarded in a feedback loop online. The more threatened someone feels, the louder they speak, and the louder they speak, the more resistance they meet. Online, it's collective over-explaining at scale. We're living in a time where reality feels fractured. So, of course, your nervous system wants secure, solid ground. Of course, you want your existence affirmed. That happens to all of us sometimes. When someone disagrees with you, even when you're reading or hearing it online, notice what happens in your body. Does your chest tighten? Does your heartbeat speed up? Does your voice accelerate? Do you feel an urgency to explain, to defend yourself? Remind yourself that urgency isn't about facts, it's about safety, because urgency is always a trauma response. What feels different between when you get pulled into that fight, even if that fight is just in your own mind, versus when you don't? What does it feel like to observe it without needing to dominate the field? That's regulation. That's sovereignty. Can you stay present without convincing? What would change if more of us stopped trying to win existence? It's so wild because as I'm saying this, the noise upstairs is just getting louder and louder and louder, right? Just perfect synchronicity of what's happening in the world. Can you be present with that without feeling like you have to win your existence over it? Can we both just exist? And as you witness this cultural fragmentation, what feels most important for you to embody in response to it? Maybe take that one to your journal, reflect on it. And you can try on this one too. I can't solve the cultural split. All I can do is to try to embody steadiness within it. So here's the nuance. I want to name a really important nuance. There's a big difference between silencing yourself and releasing the compulsion to convince, but they can look kind of similar on the outside. Shutting down says, it's not safe for me to exist here, so I'll disappear, withdraw, erase myself. Convincing says, I must secure my right to exist here, so I will force my reality on you. Embodied expression, something quieter and steadier. I exist here. I will speak, and I don't need to force you to agree. Can you feel the difference in your body? For me, the shutdown feels contracted. Convincing feels rigid, urgent, forward leaning, whereas embodied truth feels upright and grounded. This is about returning the compass to the body instead of ideology. What does it feel like to have a voice without gripping and grasping? What is it like to allow disagreement without collapse or attack or defense? Embodied expression isn't passive or combative, it's just self-held. What would change if more of us stopped trying to win existence and just remembered that we're allowed to exist even when others disagree with us or misunderstand us? When the internal courtroom dissolves, at a certain point, the body feels like that's enough. I've said what I want to say. We disagree, and I don't need to keep explaining or convincing you to see it my way or to agree with me. It's not adrenaline. It's not triumph. It's just arrival. That's when it's easier to walk away with dignity, grace, and elegance. The body knows first. The nervous system softens instead of tightening. The pace slows, the voice steadies or becomes quiet. There's no compulsion to fill the space. The words stop not because they're suppressed, but because it simply feels complete, even if unresolved. Can you be okay with unresolved? That's existence without negotiation. The external disagreement is unresolved, yet internally, it feels cleaner and clearer. That's when you know you've stopped negotiating internally. You'll also notice that the compulsion to convince and say more just dissolves. I'm naming a moment that perhaps many people haven't consciously felt yet, and that's okay. It's like this internal click where the body just says, enough. It's not shutdown or defeat, it's just compulsion. I've expressed myself. I know who I am. My existence remains intact, even though others disagree. That's profoundly different from storming off or arguing circles or just collapsing into that rumination. And this is where the authority shifts from the external outcome to internal integrity. And that is a powerful shift. That's when the metric is no longer, did they agree with me? It becomes, did I stay with myself? That's where dignity lives. And as you imagine modeling that in your own life, even in one small conversation, what would walking away with dignity and grace feel like in your body afterward? There's living wisdom in being willing to be misread, misinterpreted, misunderstood without shrinking or attacking. That's a different kind of faith. Not that others are going to respond perfectly, but that your existence doesn't depend on their response. There's maturity in allowing two realities to coexist without merging or trying to fix it. It requires tolerating ambiguity without the urgency to eliminate it. That's where dignity and sovereignty for both parties deepens. There's a quiet evolution taking place under the surface there. When you imagine leaving something unresolved, yet honoring yourself and remaining with yourself, does your body feel spacious? Or is there still a subtle pull to go back and tie it up? That's okay if there is. This is a learning process. After a hard exchange, you can place a hand on your body, on your heart, on your gut, and just close your eyes and ask yourself, did I stay with myself? And if the answer is yes, let that be the closure, even if the relationship or the conflict isn't resolved or repaired. And if the nervous system is still activated, instead of replaying the debate, tend to the activation. Maybe you need to move. Maybe you want to practice breathing slower, feeling the ground underneath your bare feet. Notice the sensations surfacing in your body and be present with what's emerging. Completion doesn't always come from agreement. Sometimes it comes from self-regulation. What can help your body trust that unresolved doesn't mean unsafe? By the way, that loop can't maintain itself without your participation. And you can love someone and have the boundaries to no longer be the mirror for their distortion. You can have the compassion for someone that you don't want to be in connection with. That's not detachment, it's field stewardship. And that leads to coherence and sovereignty. Your liberation may destabilize an old loop of shared distortion. And in doing so, it might also resolve the relationship container that held it. If your coherence disrupts another person's comfort, the relationship might dissolve. That's not failure, it's liberation from that entanglement. Interrupting the pattern isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And that's actually one of the greatest gifts that you can offer someone that you used to share a trauma loop with. And notice this isn't indifference. Your stance isn't, I don't care. Your stance is, your emotional reaction doesn't define my moral reality. Your perception doesn't define my existence. That's liberation and sovereignty. The body can relax when it knows it doesn't have to mount a defense case. And when that happens, notice the sense of lightness within you. That's not the kind of lightness that flows away, but the kind that settles in the chest. It exhales. It says, ah, I don't have to manage this anymore. That reclaims so much energy. When that internal courtroom dissolves, the body softens. The mind stops striving and trying to control things in order to feel safe. Grace is allowing existence without trying to earn it, without defending it, without litigating or negotiating it. It's about existing coherently. Grace means you're here, and that's enough. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path, someone who's ready to go deeper, beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond just the personal and also into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here, or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are, because the world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You are not the wound. You are the medicine. Let your trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration Podcast. You're not broken. You're not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour, it was initiation. It was an immersion into the very wisdom that your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.